This weekend, Birds of Prey hits theaters. That means it's time to stop and rank all 8 DCEU movies from the worst to the best. Hi, my name is Sean, and I love to talk about movies way too much. With that in mind, go ahead and join me down below in the comments section. Share your ranking of all 8 DCEU movies. My list isn't the right list, it's just my list, and I would love to see yours. I didn't include Joker in my ranking here because it's not a DCEU movie, it's in its own continuity on itself. If you want to include it in your ranking, you can do so. Also, one more thing before we get started. This week, I actually launched a podcast. It will be weekly. Right now, there's a video version on my channel, and it's available on Spotify. In the future, it will be on iTunes and all the other major podcast distributors. In this first episode, we talked about the DCEU for about 30 minutes. When will it catch up with the MCU? What kind of went wrong in the early stages where it seemed like they lacked a little bit of direction? 30-minute long discussion. You can check that out right up here. And with that said, let's get started. Coming in last place is Suicide Squad. Now, this is a movie that has a fun set of characters, a great cast, and a really bad script. Apparently, David Ayer only had 6 weeks to write the movie, and even the idea that he went with had some pretty big holes inside of it. Then after they shot the movie, the studio heads thought they really liked the trailers for the film, so they had the trailer house that cut the trailers re-edit the movie a little bit, and the end product is just kind of a mess that's all over the place. For the first 45 minutes of the movie, they're just introducing each of the characters, and they're doing so using pop music as character development for them. Then once the story gets going, it revolves around them forming the Suicide Squad, and in the process of forming the Suicide Squad, they create the villain that the Suicide Squad must battle. One of my friends described it as a snake eating its own tail. There's a lot of great moments. There's some cool shots. I like the cast playing these characters, but the product overall is just a gigantic mess. Coming in at number 7 is Justice League, one of the most disappointing films I've ever seen. Not because it's one of the worst movies, but because I love these characters so much. They're finally on the big screen together, live action for the first time. And it just feels like a movie designed by a committee to appeal to the broadest possible audience. It started as this kind of 2-film epic from Zack Snyder, and then they're like, no, just let's make it one movie. And then they thought Batman v Superman was too dark, so they're like, all right, now lighten it up, put some more jokes in there. Then he's replaced by Joss Whedon, and they went, Joss Whedon, can you put some of those Avengers jokes in there that people love? So he adds in a bunch of his quips, and it just doesn't fit together. Everything felt kind of off to me. And some of that's even because they color corrected the entire thing to brighten it up quite literally. And so the movie from beginning to end felt like it was directed by a committee of people, because that really is essentially what you're watching. And when you take a movie that's supposed to be this massive epic and then just keep cutting it down, it was even dictated it had to be under 2 hours. And when you do that, you squeeze out all the creativity and you just get a bland blockbuster, and that's what this is. Next up is Batman v Superman, one of the most divisive comic book movies of all time, and for good reason. It has really lofty ambitions, it makes some big, bold choices, and then just makes some really obvious dumb mistakes in the process. For me, I'm positive on this movie. I actually like it. It's pretty low on this ranking, but that's to say that I enjoy most all of these movies besides the bottom 2, but it's a deeply flawed film that's trying to do too many things and squish them all into one film. It felt to me like David Goyer and Zack Snyder set out to make a movie about kind of the ramifications of the movie Man of Steel, and then the studios went, what if you also put in Batman? So you have kind of Lex Luthor and Batman as these two people responding to the events of Man of Steel, and they went, what if you also make it a Justice League setup movie? And so suddenly it morphed into something bigger than it was originally intended to be and becomes this kind of bloated, convoluted film in the process. Now, I love the interactions between Bruce Wayne and Alfred. A bunch of the action, as in pretty much all Zack Snyder movies, is pretty fantastic. And it's a movie that the Ultimate Edition, the director's cut, is quite a bit better than the theatrical version because they just cut away way too much to shorten the film. But yeah, it's a movie to me that I can enjoy the positives just enough over the negatives, but I totally understand why a bunch of people see a movie that makes Superman hopeless and sidelines him in his own movie, turns Batman into this cynical killer. I get all the criticisms. There's just enough positives in the movie for me to appreciate what it was trying to do, even though it doesn't fully live up to its ambitions. Number 5, Aquaman. James Wan decided to fully embrace the silliness and inherent campiness of the Aquaman character, and for me, made for a fun, globe-trotting adventure. It's not trying to necessarily make a big statement. It's not trying to go to big emotional depths, but it kind of does a classic hero's journey type story as you watch Arthur become the king that he was destined to be. Along the way, it kind of tries to entertain however possible, sometimes with campy one-liners, sometimes with kind of overly cheesy moments where he poses and there's like this big guitar strum or something like that. For me, I had a lot of fun with it. The action is also handled really nicely. There's a lot of these long takes, whether you're talking about the chase scene where they're running on top of these rooftops, or some of the fight choreography inside of houses, where once again, they just do these wide shots where you can see everything happening. There's some familiar plot beats. Some elements can be a bit predictable. It's a fun package for me that just embraces the goofiness of a character that inherently, guy talking to fish, a little bit goofy. Next up is Shazam. This is a movie that I just thoroughly enjoyed, largely because Zachary Levi does such a great job of playing a man-child. You're getting to see what would this tween do, this 13-year-old kid do as a superhero, and they embrace all of the kind of immature things that a kid his age would attempt to do inside of that situation, where they're trying to turn it into becoming YouTube famous, trying to get girlfriends, all of that fun stuff. And while it does all of that, the fun hijinks, it also is a movie all about family, friendship, and learning to belong. And it explores that on a much deeper level than I was expecting the film to do. What holds this one back for me is there's just enough moments in it that just feel tonally off from everything else. 80% of this movie would be great for my kids and they'd have a ton of fun with it. And then there's a realistic car crash and a dad chewing out his son in a very dramatic fashion. There's a sequences where they're going to strip clubs, and I don't want to have to explain strip clubs to my 5-year-old. There's demons biting heads off of people. And so it's a movie that feels like it almost nails the tone and then just throws in just a few things that feel totally off from the rest of it. And it holds it back for me for a movie that does a great job of having a lot of fun and a lot of heart at the same time. Real quick before I give you my top 3, remember to share your ranking down below in the comment section. We're going to disagree. That's the fun part. Just keep it respectful. Also, after this video, check out this playlist up above. It's got a bunch of my other DC related rankings, the DCU heroes, the DCU villains, Batman movies, Superman movies, a bunch of fun stuff like that. If you've enjoyed this video, there's something else up there that you'll enjoy. In third place is Birds of Prey and the Fantabulous Emancipation of one Harley Quinn. This film is an absolute blast from the beginning to the end. I was so skeptical going into this film. I hadn't really liked the trailers all that much, and the images that they put out had just seemed so campy. And then I saw the film, and it seemed like this really interesting mix of like early Guy Ritchie storytelling, really cool action. Some of the sequences were apparently shot by the guy that did John Wick, and actual kind of character moments for Harley Quinn, where they kind of kind of move aside the cartoon character and let you see the character, the person inside of all of it. Along the way, there's a bunch of interesting, fun characters with Ewan McGregor as Black Mask, and then you got Victor Zsasz in it, who has a great dynamic between the two of them that can be an awful lot of fun to see while being horrifying and terrifying in other circumstances. And it's a movie that could draw comparisons to Deadpool, but it does its own thing. It's such a unique story because it's told from the mind of Harley Quinn. So it's got the laughs, it's got the characters, it has an interesting, different type of story told in a very different way, all making for an absolute great time at the movies. Our runner-up is Wonder Woman, a film that manages to take a woman wearing a US flag costume that flies around in an invisible jet with a lasso and make an exciting, funny, heartfelt film that has something to say. So much of that goes back to the irresistible charm of Gal Gadot in the lead that can be strong and naive at the same time. She's so funny while being so confident in other ways that the mix plays great. And a big part of that is also the dynamic, the relationship between her and Steve works wonderfully in the film. Her chemistry with Chris Pine works so well as they have this back and forth as each of them has a respect for one another, an attraction to one another, and in their own ways has their own fish out of water comedy in the worlds of the other person. It's also a film that has things to say. It's exploring the idea of man's inhumanity to man, which fits perfectly with a world like World War I, where there wasn't as obvious of a clear enemy inside of it. So the question raises, why did this happen? Why is this happening? And they give Wonder Woman the perspective to explore the nature of that and has something to say. This one was in strong competition for the #1 spot, but it does lose a little bit of energy as you move into the third act, and it gets very talky, very preachy as it's trying to fully communicate its message a little bit too literally. So it's not as strong as you move into that third act, unfortunately, but otherwise a very solid film. But coming in first place is Man of Steel, a film that I learned to appreciate more and more every single time I watch it. First time I saw the film, I enjoyed it, but I wasn't really sure how I felt about it because it abandons so much of what Superman is traditionally known for, especially for me, someone raised in the 80s watching the Richard Donner film and that entire Christopher Reeves run of films. And this doesn't go in that direction at all. It explores Superman and Clark Kent from a totally different direction. And it has a lot to say about the people that raise us, societal expectations, and builds that into the story and even kind of intertwines it with the villain's narrative and how that contrasts with Clark's journey. Of course, as a Zack Snyder film, it has some fantastic visuals. He's great with action. And so I love that finally we got this 21st century amazing Superman action where he's actually punching people in the face. Henry Cavill is great in the lead role with a very different take from Christopher Reeves and Brandon Routh and Dean Cain. Much more somber take of someone trying to balance all the responsibility that's on his shoulders and these different perspectives on what he should do with the powers that he has. And one of maybe Hans Zimmer's best score, and this is a guy that's made some of the best scores of all time. Put it all together, it's a movie that I understand why there's a lot of people that don't like it, but I love it. So it comes in at #1. If you want more DCEU rankings just like this one, check out that playlist right there. If you want to check out my podcast, it's right down there. Thank you so much for watching, and keep talking movies too much.